And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Glenn Barnes. Glenn is a Senior Project Director at the Environmental Finance Center at University of North Carolina.
Thank you, Lisa, and I appreciate everybody joining us today for our webinar. We're going to be talking, as Lisa said, about interlocal and inter-system water agreements and some tips to make the contracts as good as possible. And so we'll be going through this material today and have time for questions, and we anticipate getting you off in about an hour's time. So again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I did want to take a minute just to introduce the Environmental Finance Center where I work at the University of North Carolina. I've worked at the Environmental Finance Center since 2006, and we focus on how to help communities and governments provide environmental services in ways that are fair and financially sustainable. We do a lot of work with drinking water and wastewater systems across the country, both governmental and non-governmental systems, and we'll be focusing on that topic today. For those of you who maybe have other responsibilities within your organization, we do work on stormwater, water quality, watersheds, and wetlands issues as well, and we do finance work related to energy and sustainability topics. And so if any of these are of interest to you, I encourage you to check out our organization. As Lisa mentioned, we are part of a network of environmental finance centers. And the Environmental Finance Center network includes our good friends at Syracuse University and then 8 other university-based centers across the United States, roughly 1 for every EPA region. And all of us do a little bit of different work. We're all independent organizations, but all of us are focused on helping people like yourselves who provide environmental services do so in the best way possible. For the past year, a little bit more than a year now, we have been fortunate to receive funding from the US EPA to provide finance and management assistance to small drinking water systems across the United States. And so we began this process in September of 2012, and we've done a number of in-person workshops around the country in various states and territories and have offered a number of webinars. Many of you may have joined us for one of these previous events. If not, I encourage you to go to the EFC Network website to take a look at what has been going on and what resources are available. I was planning to tell you all that our project is winding down and is set to end at the end of April, but I'm very delighted to share the news with you. We found out on Friday that EPA has very generously granted us a second round of funding for the project, and we'll have another 18 months to work with water systems across the United States. In addition, I encourage you to check out the website for the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina where I work. The tool that we'll be discussing today, the resource on inter-system agreements, is available on this website, as well as a number of other resources on water system finance. And when you get a copy of the slide deck, you'll have all of these links available for you to take a look at. Before we get started, I'd just like to do a couple of poll questions with you so we can get a sense of who is on the call today. Lisa, can you pull up the first poll question for us, please?
Sure, Glenn.
Okay, so the question that you have up on the screen here is, where do you work? Again, just to give us a little bit of a sense of who's on. So if you're from a governmental water system, please select that. If you're from a water system from a non-governmental entity, select that option. If you're joining us from a state, territorial, or federal government office, please select that. If you're one of our friends in private consulting firms who work with water systems, check that bubble. And if there's something else, just please choose the other. We'll give you a couple seconds to answer that question for us. Okay, well, thank you very much. See the results here. We've got a good number of folks from state, federal, and territorial governments joining, and a good number from governmental water systems and some from non-governmental as well. So thank you very much for that. Just one more poll question before we continue on. So Lisa, if you could pull up number 2, thank you.
Okay.
And just for the water systems so for those governmental and non-governmental water systems, how many customers do you serve? EPA's definition of a small water system, as I mentioned for this project, is 10,000 or fewer. So if you serve 10,000 or fewer customers, please check the first bubble. And if you're a larger water system, please check the second bubble for us. Thank you.
I'm just going to give it a few more seconds to let folks respond. Okay.
All right.
And there are the results.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Most of you are from small water systems, and I think regardless of the size of your water system, the tips we're going to talk about today are going to be useful for you, but it's just helpful for us to get a sense of who the audience is. So thank you very much for that. We're going to close out the polls for now and just return to the presentation. So our objectives for our short time together today is first just quickly to talk broadly about water system partnerships and regionalization to get a sense of, where this general idea comes from and what the benefits are. But then in particular, we're going to spend most of today investigating contractual relationships between systems, whether that's to buy or sell water, which is a very common one, or to share services, share billing, things like that. We want to take a look at those contractual relationships and share a tool with you that has tips for successful agreements. I should mention that EPA has some really terrific resources on the topic of water system partnerships, and I've just pulled up a copy of their webpage, and the link is there. On this webpage, they have a number of their own resources, including a really terrific write-up of case studies of regionalization and water system partnerships, as well as some recordings and slides from webinars that they conducted a year ago featuring some of these types of water system partnerships. And from that particular guide, I think that they had a really nice way of breaking down water system partnerships across a spectrum. Everything from informal cooperation, which we see in many types of water systems, that include, just a handshake agreement to share equipment or, a bulk supply purchasing agreement that we see in many places around the country, through ownership transfer, where you're actually selling the assets of your water system to somebody else and getting out of the water business, or perhaps purchasing assets of another water system. And all of these types of collaborations can be helpful, both from a finance and management perspective and from an engineering perspective as well. We're going to go through a couple of the reasons why that would be. But, when we talk about partnerships, there is really a broad range of options that are available for water systems. And we've seen small and large water systems. We've seen governmental and non-governmental water systems of all sizes be able to enter into these types of agreements successfully. And so some of the particular benefits of entering into a water system partnership, the very first one really is reducing the capital and operating costs and the prices per gallon of finished water. And this is really through economies of scale. There are fixed costs for any type of water system, a minimum amount of equipment that's required, staffing, and expenses like that. And so systems that have more customers to spread those costs out over tend to have a cheaper per gallon rate than those that are unable to spread those costs out. So that's one of the real benefits of partnerships. And I should mention all of these benefits are discussed in detail in that EPA guide I mentioned earlier. Partnerships are also a way to help raise needed capital for replacement and improvement of aging water delivery infrastructure. And this could include everything from just having more customers to help pay for capital to making yourselves more attractive in the eyes of state and federal funding agencies. A couple of the other benefits of partnerships that we see, we often see sometimes smaller water systems are challenged to find and use trained operators and advanced treatment technologies. And so when they are able to work with other systems more closely, they're able in a greater ability to be able to have trained operators working on their system. And then obviously, if you're talking about water systems within a certain geographic area, there's a certain enhancement of environmental protection and resource conservation because these systems are working together. A few years back in North Carolina, we did a survey of local governments. So again, this is really looking at local government water systems and local government services in general, and asked within the next 5 to 10 years, which government service will require the most increased interlocal cooperation. And water supply was the overwhelming winner, as you can see there. It was at 82% of respondents said that water supply was going to be an important part of interlocal cooperation going into the future. And I think for all of the benefits that we've mentioned of water systems, it's very clear why that is. Nevertheless, there are some reasons why people have concerns about entering into partnerships, and probably the largest concern that we see is a desire for autonomy. Systems are very unwilling to give up control of their water supply because their water supply is what can lead to economic development. It can lead to the ability of expanding and annexing new parts of their town. And so many systems like to retain control of their water system and would just never imagine a partnership that would involve giving that up. Certainly we see that mistrust of other systems is out there, sometimes mostly through just not knowing enough about the other water system, but occasionally, in fact, with our friends from Syracuse on the line today, we did a workshop in New York State about 8 months ago, and we were talking about this very topic, and one of the participants, who was a contract engineer, told a story about 2 communities that he worked with that were looking to get a water system partnership up and running, and they had done a lot of the legwork. And one of the city council members killed it because when he had grown up in the town and played basketball in high school for the town, there had been a brawl at the game with this other community, and he had never trusted them and would never work with them. And I should mention that the brawl had been 42 years before this meeting was taking place where they were discussing this, but sometimes you do get that mistrust, football rivalries and things like that. And then obviously other reasons of just not knowing enough about other systems or the options that are there, and no real outside force to get the collaboration started. And so just as we saw on that previous slide, that water system collaboration is something that at least governmental systems feel like is going to be very high on their list of partnerships. We've also asked the question, this was at a conference a few years back, that if you manage a water system, how important is it to maintain control in the future? 67% said very important, 22% said somewhat, and really, it's only that 11% that either said it's not so much of an issue for us, or we're happy to just get rid of the water system if we could. So these are the conflicting sides of water system partnerships, and it's why today's topic, I think, is especially appropriate, because when we look back at the spectrum of water system partnerships, the farther right you go, the more we're talking about you giving up actual control of your water system to somebody else. But we're going to focus in especially today on contractual assistance. And so contractual assistance is going to mean sharing some type of service or responsibility with another system, but you would still maintain control and ownership of your system and the assets. And so we find many systems are more comfortable with that type of arrangement, or perhaps they're just purchasing water in bulk from another system or selling water in bulk to another system, rather than a situation where they're actually fully giving up control. And so in terms of water partnerships, what we're talking about here is if your water system is owned by a company or organization that owns and operates multiple utilities, that would be an example of a partnership. If you contract out management or operation services to towns that serve other utilities, that's another example. If you buy chemicals or share equipment or personnel with other systems, if you buy or sell water, or if it is the case in some states, you create an authority or a special unit of government that serves multiple communities, these are all examples of water partnerships, and all of them to some degree or another are going to require an inter-system water agreement to be able to function properly. A few years ago, we were doing work on behalf of the North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources, where they were asking us to take a look at all of the water system interconnections in the state of North Carolina. And the map that I have up here is a visual display of what we were looking at. So these were agreements in between units of government that operated water systems, so not including the non-governmental systems. And we were looking at where there were connections between communities and what direction it goes in. If you can see clearly enough, some of the arrows here have one head on them, so they're pointing in one direction. Some are pointing in both directions if it's an emergency connection. And as part of that review, we were asked to take a look at the contracts that manage these interlocal water partnerships across the state of North Carolina. And so we wanted to see as many of these contracts as we possibly could. And so we started digging them up and found after a while that there were quite a number of them across the state of North Carolina. In fact, we identified more than 100 of them. And we thought it would be really important for us to review all of these contracts to see really what was working well and what wasn't working. And this is one of those places where there's a great advantage of being a university-based center that we were able to get a graduate student to actually read the 105 contracts as part of his master's paper and do some great reporting on us. So his name was Andrew Dadesky, and he did a good bit of yeoman's work to be able to show you the guide that we have today. And so I just want to give him some credit for that effort. And as we reviewed these 100+ contracts all around the state, what became pretty clear to us is that while some of them were very well written and were going to address many of the issues that you would expect to find when two water systems are looking at physically tying together to sell water, a good number of them did not. And so we wanted to create a resource that would be available for water systems to help them understand how to craft successful interlocal agreements and intersystem agreements. And we decided that we did not want to do a model contract. We saw examples of these intersystem agreements that were based on model contracts that did not necessarily capture all the unique elements that one particular water system may encounter. And so instead, what we decided to do, this was drafted largely by my colleague Jeff Hughes, who's the director of our Environmental Finance Center in North Carolina, and myself, is that we put together this guide of looking at the tips related to issues that you may not have thought of in crafting an intersystem water agreement, or perhaps issues that you were hoping to avoid. And so what it is a list of different questions that you can ask yourself about the type of agreement that you have, and then some descriptions of what that is, and I think most importantly, example text from actual water system agreements that addresses the particular question that we are trying to get at. So the text that we give is not necessarily meant to be a model contract clause, but it's just more of an idea of what a contract could look like that addresses a particular issue. We also included some advice for getting these intersystem agreements right and avoiding some of the big pitfalls. And, you know, as I mentioned, it's not a draft contract, and not every issue that will come up in every single document is covered here. We really focused on the main issues. But the reason that we wanted to create this guide and the reason that we wanted to share it with you today is a very simple one. Working with other water systems can be a very, very beneficial thing for all the reasons that we listed at the beginning of the broadcast today. But there's always the potential for these agreements to cause some headaches. And oftentimes these agreements are in place for a very long time. Earlier when I had the slide up with the images of the fronts of some of the water contracts, a couple of those we had to scan in because they dated back to the 1960s or 1970s. And so some of these contracts have been in place for 40 years and will be in place for much longer. Many of them don't have an expiration date. And so we just really want to make sure that if you are crafting an agreement with a water system that is brand new, or if you're at a point in time where you're going to be revising an agreement, that you think through some of these topics of consideration, so that way the agreement is going to really define the partnership the best way possible and hopefully save you some heartache down the road, or save your successors some heartache down the road when big questions come up. And certainly, you know, as an entity that provides both training and technical assistance for water systems all across the country, and we've often talked about this issue of intersystem agreements, we are very often faced with systems that complain to us, frankly, about being in bad agreements where, you know, we hadn't thought of something that came up and now it's causing all kinds of trouble. So what I want to do for the balance of the time today is to quickly go through some of the areas that are covered in this document. We're not going to go through every area and we're not going to go in great detail, but I want to give you a flavor for what's in the document and how it could be useful for you. And in particular, some of the big issues that we see with intersystem agreements are going to be things like the service area boundaries. That's especially true if we're looking at multiple units of government working together. Usage limits on water, meter maintenance and ownership, issues about water quality. Big one here, capital costs. So if there's a future need to expand the water system, how does that factor into pricing? Resale of water or capacity for water, water pressure issues, communications and service interruptions, and then conservation status and measures. That last bullet is particularly important in areas where you have a drought. Certainly in the southeast where I live, in the past 10 years, we've had 2 major droughts in North Carolina, and if you're calling in today from California, Nevada, Arizona, parts of New Mexico, parts of Idaho, you know that there's a very severe drought going on where water systems are down to very limited capacity of water. If you have an agreement to sell some of that water to another community and some of these issues haven't been outweighed, you could be giving yourself some issues and some problems right now. The first place that I want to start with in talking about these issues is service area, because I think that this is where we tend to hear a lot of the complaints coming from systems that have done an arrangement with each other. And so, we're talking about, well, what are the current boundaries of the water system? Many water systems that are governmental systems, for example, sell water outside of municipal limits. Well, if they were to enter into a partnership with the next town over or the county, what are the current boundaries? What are the planned future boundaries? Does the city or town have a growth document? Are they looking at annexation? Are there unserved areas? What is the process to change or expand the boundaries of service into the future? If you've got 2 towns next to each other that are expanding, who gets to extend lines into those new areas? And, are there existing maps of service areas? And so these are just some of the issues that we see up there. And I think, I'm going to include now just on the screen a couple of examples of the contract language from actual interlocal agreements. And again, these are all North Carolina based and they're largely local governments, but I think they're mostly transferable to all water systems across the United States. So in this particular case, between a county and a town within the county, they defined in the interlocal agreement that the water and sewer service to areas outside of the existing Dobson service area shall be provided by the county. And that if the county is not able or willing to provide an extension of service and there's interest, then there is a possibility of Dobson providing it instead. So this is a very simple example of including information in that interlocal agreement to help avoid a future problem of a question about service area. Here's a second example from, again, a county and local government example that in the event that the city were to annex part of the county into their municipal boundaries, that if the county had water system pipes and equipment in that area, that the city would reserve the right to buy them at a fair and equitable price. So that's looking at transferring the ownership of assets once an annexation takes place. So service area, very, very important issue. Another important issue that I just want to touch on a little bit is the maximum allowable peak usage of water, which is a typical item that we see in these types of agreements. And you'll often see something like, well, it's 200,000 gallons per day. But what exactly does that mean? What if there's a major leak? What if the town that is purchasing water needs to exceed that amount? Is there a request that can be put in place? What if the capacity or demands change permanently, so not in an emergency or one-off situation, but a permanent increase? Is there a way to revisit and revise the contract? So again, this is something that we think is very important to take a look at. And so an example from an agreement between 2 municipalities that we have here is, to furnish the purchaser at the point of delivery potable treated water meeting applicable purity standards not to exceed the following maximum demands. And it has an instantaneous rate, a daily rate, and a monthly rate. So that way there's a little bit of wiggle room here in terms of, an emergency situation that maybe would exceed a little bit of the daily demand, but would be within the monthly usage. And we thought that this was an interesting example to show you of this type of contract language. As I mentioned earlier, we find that capital costs are a major area of concern when it comes to intersystem water agreements. And so, part of it is to ensure that the supplier of the water, so the system that is selling water, how are they assured to receive adequate payment for the use of their capital? And so that's something that would be perhaps built into the sale price of the water. But in addition to that, there's a question of how the agreement addresses what will happen when the facility needs to be upgraded or expanded or even repaired. And so I've often heard examples from water systems that we've worked with who have said, well, we have an interlocal agreement, we have a negotiated price, but we need to do an upgrade on our water treatment plant, and we feel like the system we sell water to that uses 25% of the water that is treated should pay for 25% of the treatment plant upgrades. And the system buying the water may have a different view on that. And so addressing this question in the contract itself, in the agreement between the water systems, is a way to clearly define what this question is going to be. And I think related to this is the last bullet up here. Does the agreement specify a minimum purchase requirement? So in the last slide, we were talking about a maximum amount of water that a system could buy, but there also may need to be a minimum purchase requirement. So that way, if you are selling water to another water system, you are aware of how much money you're going to get in on a daily or monthly basis at least. So that way, as you're doing capital improvements, you can count on a certain level of income. And so a couple of examples of this that we see, I think, are the common methods for addressing capital costs. One which I mentioned is rolling the capital costs into the commodity charge. So you're going to charge the purchasing system, or if you are a purchasing system, you're going to pay a per gallon rate that includes capital costs. And if you're looking at the idea of full cost pricing, this is something that you really should be doing for all of your water customers, which is including the full cost of providing water service. But we also see in some cases that a purchasing system would be asked to pay an upfront capacity fee or a recurring capacity fee that would help cover the cost of capital improvements. We have seen some examples of a purchasing system assuming a percentage of the seller's debt service. So if the system that is selling water has recently built a water treatment plant, for example, and they have taken debt out on that, and the purchasing system will be buying a third of the water from it, then perhaps the purchasing system will assume a third of the debt service payments as a way of covering capital. And then in very rare instances, we do see some examples of agreements that pass through to retail customers an impact fee. So, when a new customer signs up for water system service, they may be charged a tap fee to actually run a line to their home or business, and then also an impact fee, which is the fee charged to them to cover the impact of them joining the water system. And for an individual household, this would normally not be very large, but if you're looking at a large development or shopping center or office building, that could be a much higher impact fee. And so in some very rare cases, we've seen examples of passing through to these retail customers some type of impact fee directly. So a few examples that we have from contracts on this. One is this idea of Monroe and Union in the top example, that Monroe agrees to negotiate with Union the terms and conditions of financing Union's share of the capital improvements to, in this case, it's a wastewater treatment plant, conveyance, and disposal facilities. So that was part of their contract. And then another example from a different agreement below, an additional charge of $400 per month is the figure calculated by city to provide for recovery of its capital costs. So in that case, the city was charging the county water district a flat fee of $400 a month in addition to the sale of water to be able to help cover those capital costs. And another example to share with you in this area that's more related to the minimum purchase requirements, we have a couple up there, Chatham County and Siler City being the top one, that the town of Siler City will bill and county will pay for a minimum quantity of 500,000 gallons per month, regardless of whether or not the county actually uses such quantity. And again, this is just an example of how the seller system and the purchasing system can have a good sense of how much money is going to change hands on a regular basis, so that way the selling system can plan for this income for its capital projects. Another issue that comes up is variable charges. What does the agreement say about how commodity charges are calculated, and more importantly, how they're modified over time? Many of the contracts we read saw no mention of this in any way, even to say that on an annual basis or what the process would be for changing it. We did see some that would be tied to the consumer price index or some measure of inflation, linked to the retail rate increases. So if the seller system raises its rates for its own customers, it would raise its rates by some percentage of its bulk purchasing system as well. Looking at cost accounting, so what was the cost of actually providing service and basing the charges on that. A couple other things that we see as important elements of contracts, there are restrictions on the resale of water. So in some cases, if you are selling water or buying water from another system, the selling system will not want you to turn around and resell that water to somebody else because they may want to be able to provide that bulk service themselves. And so we have a couple of examples of this up on the screen, basically saying that they shall not provide water service to somebody outside of corporate limits, for example, without receiving approval from the selling system. It's just a typical way that this is handled, so that way the selling system has some authority about whether or not their water is being passed through to somebody else or not. Another key issue that we wanted to highlight is water pressure standards. And I'm one of those people who, likes a nice shower with lots of pressure, but that's not really what we're talking about here. When it comes to water systems, certainly keeping your customers happy is important, but mostly it's about fire flow requirements and also about making sure that the standards prevent flow that is at, not at a low enough pressure that it causes sediment fallout or harm to plumbing that can come from high flow requirements. So, high pressures. We're looking at trying to get a pressure standard that will work for the entire water system, and then we just have a very clear example from a contract that covered this particular point. And finally, as we get into some of the last couple of issues that we see here, they tend to be around things like supply interruptions and communications between the systems. So if there is a planned service interruption, there has to be a minimum advance notice of that interruption given to the purchasing system from the selling system. If supply is insufficient, so due to an emergency situation or a drought or whatever the case would be, who is getting the priority of receiving water and what's the notice around that? We've also seen in areas that have had droughts some issues about conservation status. So as I mentioned, in North Carolina, we had several bad droughts in the past 10 years. And there were some cases where one town had, instituted conservation measures that were very harsh because of low water supply. It would cause, hardship for some businesses in town, like say a car wash or a laundry. But then it was selling water to the next town over that was not required to follow those same conservation measures. And so therefore, the car washes and laundromats in the next town over were able to stay open fully using water from the first town. So one way to avoid this is to actually build into the contract some discussion about conservation status. So in the event that there are mandatory or voluntary water conservation efforts, for example, in this first paragraph here, that the purchasing system will institute the same conservation efforts. And finally, we wanted to talk about a couple of the ways of the systems working together through their contracts. So, does the agreement address non-revenue water or excess inflow and infiltration for sewer agreements. Non-revenue water, the real key here is to think about hydrants. I'm working with 2 communities in Illinois right now as part of our assistance to small drinking water systems. And this is a question that came up. The one community doesn't typically charge for hydrant use, and they actually don't want to charge the community that will buy water from them for hydrant use, but how do they actually calculate that in the agreement? Does the agreement allow for variations due to emergencies? Certainly we've talked about that a lot today with drought and other conditions. And then are there agreed upon exit clauses and situations? So as I mentioned, some of these contracts have been in place 40 or more years and could go on, but are there ways in the agreement to actually get out, and what options do each party have? So once again, I'm just going to pull up the slide showing these guides that are available on the EFC at the University of North Carolina website. And I'll mention those 2 communities in Illinois that we're working with right now. We actually gave them a copy of this draft agreement, and they are using it to help create their current interlocal agreement that they're working on right now. You know, we've seen examples certainly of municipal and governmental systems selling to each other. We've seen examples of a governmental system selling to a non-governmental system. We've seen some examples of a non-governmental system, say a hotel, for example, that we worked with in the Pacific that sold water to the U.S. Park Service that was across the street. So that was from a non-governmental system to a governmental system. And we've seen agreements between non-governmental systems as well. So in many cases, you may have a condo that has water treatment that sells to the next condo or hotel over if they're a little bit isolated from the main area. So these are the types of agreements that we think can be successful across a range of water systems. And I really encourage you to take a look at these guides if you're looking at these agreements, or if you currently have a contract to buy or sell water with another system, to take a look at this guide as well and see if your current contract addresses some of these issues. And if not, the next time the contract has to be revised, you may want to incorporate some of these things in as well. And I should mention that if you have any questions about these, feel free to reach out to us. And in fact, we're going to close in just a minute with a few poll questions about you requesting assistance of us on this topic and some other topics that we have available to do some one-on-one assistance under this grant from EPA. But before that, just real quick, and before we get to the question and answer time, I just want to tell you this is the first of 4 webinars we're going to be doing about small water system partnerships and regionalization. Our next scheduled one is next Wednesday, a week from today, also at 2:30 Eastern. And the topic is going to be system mergers. And we have a terrific speaker lined up from South Carolina. It was a project that we worked on this past year where 5 small town water systems within a county merged into a new regional water system. And he's got a very interesting story to share about some of the benefits and the pitfalls of those types of system mergers. And so we encourage you to look out for an announcement on that and sign up for it at our website. And then, as I said, just before we take your questions, I just want to close by asking you a couple of quick questions. So there are 3 of them. And Lisa, can you go ahead and pull the first one up for us, please?
Sure, let me go ahead and do that. Should be up now.
Okay, great. So this is a very basic question. Do you want us to send you more information on interlocal agreements and on the guide that we talked about today? So just either answer yes or no. And if you answer yes, we have your email address, and we'll send you an email with a link to the guide and some other really helpful information on system partnerships.
Okay, Glenn, I'm just going to give it a few more seconds because folks are still responding. Alrighty, looks like we got everybody who's going to respond to that one.
All right, let's go with the next question then, Lisa, please.
Sure, here it comes.
So as part of our EPA grant, we have the ability to provide some one-on-one help to systems. And unfortunately, this is going to be for our systems on the line today that serve 10,000 or fewer customers. But if you'd like help, you can select as many as you want here, developing a budget for your water system, calculating key financial indicators, looking at future capital projects and how they're going to impact your rates and your revenues, just generally on rate setting, or help determining if your rates are affordable for your customers. Go ahead and select any of the items up here if you're from a small water system. And within the next couple of days, we will reach out to you with some resources and to set up a time to meet with you to be able to provide this assistance. It's very nice that EPA pays for all of this for us, so it's just a little bit of your time, and hopefully this will be useful for you. And then we're going to have a couple more options on the next question as well for you. So just go ahead and take a minute and fill that out for us.
Alrighty, I'm going to wait a few more seconds. Okay, looks like we got all the responses for that one.
All right,
and now the last
one. Lisa, can you just pull up the last one, please?
You got it.
All right, so similar to the question that we had before, we just have a couple of other options for one-on-one help. So different areas of the grant. We've been talking a lot today about regionalization and financial management of systems, but if you're interested in doing an asset management inventory, understanding your system's water loss, managing the energy use of your water system, or understanding available loan and grant programs for your water system, please again go ahead and check any of the boxes that apply if you're from a small water system. And again, we'll be reaching out to you in the next couple of days to provide you some resources and some individual help in these areas as well.
All right, I'm going to wait a few more seconds for last-minute responses. All right, thank you everyone for your participation in that.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, I want to take the balance of our time together today to answer any questions that you might have on the guide that we talked about today on any of these categories, or generally on water system partnerships and regionalization. I have my phone number and email address up on the screen right now, so if you want to take that down or get it from the slide deck later on, don't be a stranger, please. Call or email anytime that you have questions on this. We're more than happy to help you out. And as Lisa mentioned at the beginning, because of the large number of people on the line today, we're just going to be taking questions typed in. So there'll be a question box for you on your little GoToWebinar module on the upper right corner of your screen. And if you don't see it up, there'll be a little orange arrow that you can click on, and then you can type in your questions. And we'll take the rest of the time to answer those questions for you that we have today. And Lisa will be kind enough to read them out as they come in, if there are any.
Sure, there are a few that have come in. And let's start with the first one. This question reads, in a situation where a community doesn't have any infrastructure and hasn't even formed a water district, like colonies in the U.S.-Mexico border region, but would like to partner with a neighboring county or city which has a water system, what are the issues to consider?
Okay, that's a really great question. So, you know, if we want to essentially extend water service to a place where water service does not exist, how would we go about doing that, or what issues come up in terms of contracting? And I think one of the big issues that's going to come up is who exactly is going to own the infrastructure for that particular water system. So if there is a neighboring system, for example, that is interested in selling water to an area that's not currently being served with potable drinking water or wastewater service, would they extend their own lines there? Would they pay for the infrastructure? Or would they want a creation of a new entity that would have to pay for the infrastructure issues that are there? Now, in terms of just paying for infrastructure and capital improvements, which is an area that we've touched on a good bit today, I think one of the things that we find is that there's a question about who is actually going to pay for that and how is it going to be paid for, and is there federal or state money available? And generally speaking, water infrastructure is paid for by the future users of the new system. So if you are a local government system, for example, and there's a new development coming in, that development would generally be responsible for paying for the lines that go in and the extension of the water service. And so regardless of whether the pipes are owned by the selling system or they're owned by a new entity, that's at least the way it's typically done. Now, in many cases, though, you want to extend water system into a community that's a lower income community. And we've had an example of that here actually in the town where I work in Chapel Hill, of a low-income neighborhood in the area of town where they've been looking to extend water lines. And the residents there have a very hard time paying the somewhat large cost of extending water lines into this existing lower-income neighborhood. And this is where I think you would, potentially look at options of federal and state loan and grant programs that may be available to help lower the cost of extending the infrastructure. Or there may be possibilities for the existing system that would be selling water to help pay for some of that infrastructure because they'll be getting a new market of customers. But I think in terms of these types of agreements, those are the types of major issues that I think you would see. But this type of agreement would be very helpful if what is ultimately decided is that the water provided to that new area would be managed by an entity other than the existing water system that would be selling the water.
All right. Thank you, Glenn. We've got another question here. It comes from an attendee by the name of, and forgive me on the pronunciation, Ghassan Khaled. And Ghassan asks, are you planning to use CUPS? It's an acronym, I believe, CUPSS.
Yes, so Ghassan, Ghassan, good to hear from you. He's with EPA Region 3, and it's been a great partner on this project for us. And so CUPS is called the Checkup Program for Small Systems. It was a program that EPA created to help with the overall system management of small water systems. So it's a tool that you can use for asset management. It's a tool that you can use for tracking work orders on systems, for creating financial plans. It's freely available from the EPA, so if you just Google CUPS, you will find this. It's one of many type programs that are out there to help with these types of issues. And I think whether you use CUPS or a different piece of software, it is really important if you're looking at two water systems that want to merge together. One of the key issues that you really need to look at may be, why does one water system want to buy water from another system? Is it because they have failing infrastructure for their treatment plan, or is it a cost issue, or do they just want a line for emergencies? And so CUPS and other similar programs, and we have a suite of asset management tools as well that the environmental finance centers have developed, they are a way of helping the potential purchasing system and the selling system understand what is the condition of the assets of the selling system, of the purchasing system, excuse me. So in some cases, you may not be able to pipe water from one system to another because the purchasing system's pipes are very old or brittle. We often see that this is an issue of say, an older system that may be in a mobile home park or a small, homeowner association development wanting to attach itself to a local government system, that the pipes, have never had to handle high pressure water before and that they're not able to do so. And so any type of asset management review will help you get at these particular issues. And in fact, again, I mentioned these two communities that we're working with in Illinois. are dealing with this particular issue because they're actually both small water systems. One is just a little bit under that 10,000 threshold. The other is a much smaller system, maybe about 2,000 customers. And the 2,000 customer system, they have some issues of old pipes, and they're afraid that if they do a water interconnection, that they may not be able to handle the needed pressure from the larger water system. And so, you know, doing an asset management review is a really good way of identifying these types of problems. So thank you for that question.
All right. Our next question comes from Mary Jackman. Mary wants to know, how do I convince the town to take over the water system in a park that the town already supplies but does not maintain?
So this is a tricky question, and I think Mary's getting at it. You know, one of the many issues that we could talk about with water system partnerships is, you know, if you want to have somebody take over control of a system as a part of regionalization, you have to find somebody who's willing to do so. And in fact, we did a training back in April in Ohio that was all water systems operated by mobile home parks. And I asked the question, you know, how many of you would like to get out of the water business? And I don't think I even finished the question before every hand was in the air. So I know there are many places that would like to get out of the water business and would like to sell their assets, especially if they're in a situation where they're already buying water from the system they'd like to sell to. So they're buying the water in bulk, but they're having to maintain the pipes and possibly meters and deal with those types of issues. So I think, you know, how do you help somebody become willing to buy the system? You know, I think this is where you get in a little bit of a catch-22 when it comes to these inter-system partnerships, because if you want to get out of the water business because you have aging infrastructure, or you have a hard time paying bills, or you know, you've had issues of needing to increase treatment capacity due to new federal regulations or something like that, if you have financial trouble or debt on the system, those are all things that make you really want to get out of the water business and make somebody not want to buy your water system. In fact, the most attractive water systems to purchase are going to be those that are actually both financially and from an asset management perspective in pretty good shape. So that way the system that is purchasing is not buying a big headache for itself. And so, you know, Mary, I don't know the specifics of your particular system, but you know, I think as I was talking about the asset management review, that's a first step in showing, well, what is the condition of the assets that we have? What are some of the issues that we're looking at? What is the demographic that we have, and how much are people buying water? And, you know, if there's a situation too where, you know, it might be a mobile home park or homeowner association where you have individual homeowners, what is their ability to be able to pay for water? Because if a town takes over and wants to meter them, what's the implications of that? I think that these are some of the ways that you begin the conversation about this, because, you know, you've got a situation right now where the town is already selling the water, and so in order to take over the infrastructure as well, you know, it would seem that there would have to be some benefit to them for doing so. And I think if, you know, it may be that you could be going to metered water or have more control over that particular water system. That may be something that's really attractive. But, you know, I would say, again, not knowing all the particulars of your system, it's good to start with just a base understanding of what's the financial position of the system, what's the assets of the system, and kind of go from there. And I think if, you know, if in reviewing that the assets are not in great shape, you know, it may be very difficult to convince somebody to take the system over. So I apologize, that's kind of a general answer. Mary, if you'd like to send me an email or call me to follow up specifically, I'd be happy to chat with you.
Okay, we've got several questions from folks that are interested in obtaining a copy of the slides or viewing a recording of this webinar. And both of those items will be made available on the EFC Network website. That's efcnetwork.org. We also have an individual asking for an email address for the specific person to contact, and that email address is listed on your screen right now. It is our presenter, Glenn Barnes. It's GLENNBARNES at sog.unc.edu. And we have about 4 minutes left, so I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. What do you think, Glenn?
Sure.
Okay, I've got a question here from Ian Ackamore. Ian wants to know, can you give an example of a water quality agreement that you saw in your research? And what is the program you received your EPA grant from?
Okay, well, let me answer the second question first. So we are funded for this technical assistance work, the training,